They were experts. These people had a great influence, and they were experts in a business that has very few experts, really.
You'd think being one of the most iconic figures in Hollywood history would earn you universal respect. But in Clint Eastwood's case, that couldn't be further from the truth. Behind the steely stare and silent strength, Eastwood's career has been anything but calm. Some of the biggest names in film, actors, directors, even musicians, have clashed with him in ways that were public, personal, and sometimes downright explosive. What happened behind the cameras that turned admiration into resentment? Why did so many walk away from Clint not with praise, but with scars? This isn't the story of a legend's rise. This is the story of how Clint Eastwood, the man, the myth, the enigma, managed to pass off half of Hollywood, and why some people still aren't over it. Let's start where it all began, with the woman who loved him, fought for him, and ultimately took him to court. Sondra Locke wasn't just Clint Eastwood's co-star. For over a decade, she was his partner, muse, and at one point, the closest person in his life. They met in 1975 on the set of The Outlaw Josie Wales, and the chemistry was instant. Locke was bold, talented, and had ambitions beyond just being someone's leading lady. But as their relationship grew, so did the imbalance. On screen, they looked like equals. Behind closed doors, it was a different story. For nearly 10 years, they lived together. Even though Sondra was still legally married to another man, Clint called their first film together one of his all-time favorites. They went on to do 6 films side by side. But once she started exploring her own projects, writing, directing, acting outside his orbit, things got ugly fast. One day, without warning, Locke came home to find herself locked out of their shared house. No explanation, no conversation, just gone. But that wasn't the end of it. She took Clint to court for palimony, a kind of financial compensation for long-term partners who were never legally married. Eastwood settled quietly, and to the public that looked like closure. Except, it wasn't. As part of that settlement, Clint used his influence to secure her a directing deal with Warner Brothers. On the surface, it seemed like a fresh start for Locke. But behind the scenes, something strange was going on. Over 30 of her film pitches were rejected without reason. Not one made it to production. The so-called deal turned out to be a dead end, a fake opportunity. Locke eventually realized she'd been handed a paper contract with no intention of it ever going anywhere. She sued Clint again, this time for fraud. And once again, he settled, privately and without admitting wrongdoing. By then, her career was in ruins. The damage was done. Sondra Locke had gone from rising star to forgotten name. And for years, Hollywood insiders whispered that her biggest mistake wasn't who she loved, but who she trusted. But Locke wasn't the only one who took aim at Clint. The next clash would involve 2 titans of cinema, and a war of words that shook the industry. In 2006, Clint Eastwood dropped 2 heavy-hitting World War II films back-to-back, Flags of Our Fathers and Letters from Iwo Jima. Critics praised their scale and storytelling. 2 war epics told from opposite sides of the battlefield. But for one iconic director, something important was missing. Spike Lee. Lee didn't hold back. In interviews, he called out Eastwood for what he didn't show: black soldiers. African-American Marines had fought bravely in the Pacific, but you'd barely know it watching either film. Spike made his point simple. If you blinked, you missed the one black guy in the movie. Clint didn't like that. At all. He fired back sharply, telling Lee to shut his face. No apology, no clarification, just a full-throttle rebuttal. Spike wasn't having it. His response, equally blunt. "Clint's not my father," he said, "and we're not on a plantation." He went on to say that Eastwood sounded less like a filmmaker and more like an angry old man stuck in the past. For a brief moment, it felt like the entire industry was watching 2 of its most respected voices square off, not over box office numbers, but over who gets to be seen on screen. Years later, the heat cooled. Both men moved on, and reports say they eventually made peace. But that moment marked a turning point. Clint Eastwood, once untouchable, was now seen by some as a relic fighting against change. And then came a feud that went far beyond words, into a threat so direct, it left audiences stunned. American Sniper wasn't just a movie, it was a lightning rod. Directed by Eastwood, it told the story of Navy SEAL Chris Kyle and became a massive box office success. But for filmmaker Michael Moore, the praise rang hollow. Just days after its release, Moore took to social media with a cryptic post. Without naming names, he condemned the idea of glorifying snipers. a deeply personal issue for him. His uncle had been killed by one during World War II. Fans quickly connected the dots. The message was aimed at American Sniper, and by extension, at Clint. The response? Chilling. Not long after, Eastwood stepped up to the podium at an event. With his trademark stare, he looked out at the audience and said coldly, "If Michael Moore ever shows up at my house for an interview, I'll shoot him." At first, the room went silent. Then a few nervous chuckles. Surely he was joking. But Clint didn't laugh. He doubled down. "I'm serious. I mean it." To some, it was just Eastwood being Eastwood. Blunt, provocative, no filter. To others, it crossed a line. Moore never fired back publicly, and the moment faded. But the comment stuck. It revealed just how deep Clint's convictions ran, and how little he cared about Hollywood's approval. And if you think that reaction was intense, just wait until you hear what he told Leonardo DiCaprio. Leonardo DiCaprio had been waiting for a role like J. Edgar. It was intense, challenging, dramatic. The kind of project Oscar dreams are made of. And with Clint Eastwood directing, expectations were sky high. But from the moment they stepped on set, it was clear. These two worked very differently. Clint is famous for his one-take approach. He doesn't like rehearsals, he doesn't believe in doing the same scene over and over. In his world, you get in, do the job, and move on. But DiCaprio? He's the opposite. Detail-oriented, methodical, always searching for just the right nuance. So when Leo asked to redo a scene, just one more take to get it right, Clint looked at him, dead serious, and said, "With all due respect, sir, you're beginning to bore the hell out of me." That wasn't a joke. That was the end of the day's shoot. Crew members were stunned. DiCaprio didn't push back. He simply nodded and stepped away. The rest of the filming was polite, but cold. The creative chemistry was gone. Later, when DiCaprio was approached for another Eastwood-directed project, he declined without fanfare. No public statement, no gossip, just a quiet decision to never work with him again. And he wasn't the only one on that set who felt the chill. Armie Hammer, who played Clyde Tolson in the film, thought they were still rehearsing when Clint called cut, and then walked away. Hammer still had the script in his hand. When he asked Clint what to do about it, Eastwood just shrugged. "I'll edit the script out." But if you think that was awkward, wait until you hear what Tom Hanks experienced. Not tension, but something oddly silent. When Tom Hanks signed on to play Captain Chesley Sully Sullenberger in Sully, he expected a smooth ride. After all, Clint Eastwood was a legend, and Hanks had worked with the best. But what he found was something different. Hanks later joked that Eastwood doesn't direct like most directors. He behaves more like a cowboy than a filmmaker. There were no loud commands, no drawn-out feedback sessions. In fact, there were barely any words at all. On set, Clint was a ghost in boots. Quiet, watching, waiting. According to Hanks, he doesn't yell action or cut. He just kind of looks at you. And if you're smart, you start acting. If he doesn't like it, you'll know. Not because he tells you, but because of the look. There was one moment during filming when Hanks nervously approached Eastwood with a scene idea. Something simple, collaborative. He got halfway through explaining it when Clint slowly turned, locked eyes with him, and said absolutely nothing. Just stared. No approval, no rejection, just silence. That was the answer. Hanks later said it felt like being trained like a horse, and coming from one of the most respected actors alive, that's saying something. Still, the film was a hit. The experience, a little unnerving. But while some actors walked away rattled, one legendary figure never even walked in. Because Clint Eastwood's version of the West was just too dark for John Wayne. Clint Eastwood grew up watching John Wayne. To him, the Duke wasn't just a movie star, he was the symbol of the American West. And for a while, critics thought Clint might be his heir. Same grit, same silence, same stare. But when Clint's star began to rise, John Wayne didn't offer a handshake. He offered a hard pass. The two men had vastly different visions of the West. Wayne's cowboys were clean-cut, heroic, always on the side of justice. Clint's were morally gray, loners, drifters, guns for hire with haunted pasts. The comparison irritated Wayne. But the real breaking point came in 1973. That year, Clint directed and starred in High Plains Drifter, a dark, eerie western that was more ghost story than gunslinger fantasy. Critics loved it. Wayne hated it. Clint, unaware of the storm brewing, sent Wayne a friendly letter, a proposal. What if they made a western together? Two icons, one screen, a cinematic event. What Clint got in return was a blistering rejection. Wayne didn't just say no, he ripped the film apart, calling it unrealistic and accusing it of disrespecting the frontier values he stood for. He didn't want to share the screen with Eastwood. He didn't want to be associated with him. Clint's response? None. He never wrote back, never addressed it publicly. He just moved on, quietly, as always. Later, in the 1970s, both were briefly considered for a buddy western called The Hostiles. Wayne passed, Eastwood declined, and the film was never made. Two titans, two visions, and one of Hollywood's biggest what-ifs burned to the ground before it ever got off the page. But while Clint was rejected by his childhood hero, even his romantic relationships were becoming cautionary tales, especially when love and career collided. Clint Eastwood's personal life wasn't just complicated, it was a maze. Multiple relationships, overlapping families, and a pattern that left more than a few partners quietly sidelined. It started early. While married to Margaret Johnson, Clint began a long-running affair with stuntwoman Roxanne Tunis. The relationship was well known in industry circles, and in 1964 they had a daughter, Kimber, while Clint was still publicly committed to Margaret. When Margaret fell seriously ill, Clint stayed. They reconciled, but the affair with Roxanne continued until it didn't. In 1975, just as that relationship ended, Clint met Sondra Locke, the woman who would later sue him not once, but twice. But she wasn't the last. In the 1990s, he started seeing actress Frances Fisher. They had a daughter, Francesca. That same year, Clint won 2 Oscars for Unforgiven. And just months later, he met someone new. That someone was Dina Ruiz, a local news anchor assigned to interview him. They hit it off fast, married quickly, and had a daughter named Morgan. Dina became a stable presence, until she wasn't. By 2013, their marriage ended in a high-profile divorce. But Clint didn't stay single long. He met Christina Sandera, a hostess at his own ranch hotel in Carmel. She moved into his home in 2014, and they've been together ever since. People close to the family say the children like her. They describe her as normal. And in Clint Eastwood's world, that might be the rarest thing of all. But even outside his personal life, not everyone walked away from Clint's sets with praise. Some felt dismissed, others felt silenced. And one rock star didn't hold back at all. To the outside world, Clint Eastwood is the epitome of calm control. But to those who've worked under him, that calmness can feel cold. On set, there's no yelling, no chaos, but also no warmth. Multiple actors have described it the same way. He doesn't say action, he doesn't say cut. He just looks at you. If you hesitate, you're already behind. The message is clear. If you're not ready, you don't belong. For young actors, it can be terrifying. For veterans, it can feel like a wall. There's no collaboration, no feedback, no chance to shape the scene. You either get it in one take, or you don't get it at all. That style has earned Clint a reputation. Efficient, no nonsense, but emotionally distant. Some say it's brilliant. Others say it shuts people out. And the deeper you go into his career, the clearer the pattern becomes. Whether it's a relationship, a co-star, a musician, or a legend like John Wayne, Clint doesn't chase. He doesn't explain. He doesn't ask for approval. He just moves on. And as we reach the end of Clint Eastwood's story, that trait becomes the very thing that defines him, not just as a director, but as a man. Clint Eastwood has spent over half a century mastering the art of silence, in his performances, his direction, and his life. But that silence, that legendary cool, hasn't always been admired. Sometimes, it's been feared. He's been called a genius, a control freak, a visionary, a loner. To some, he's the last real cowboy in Hollywood. To others, he's a symbol of resistance, to change, to conversation, to accountability. But here's the strange thing about Clint. He never asked to be liked. He doesn't chase applause. And he certainly doesn't chase approval. He built his legacy on grit, not grace. And in doing so, he left a trail of unforgettable films, and just as many unforgettable fallouts, from the actress who sued him twice, to the actors who walked away quietly, to the icons who refused to stand beside him. Eastwood's path has been lined with respect and rejection. But maybe that's the paradox of being a legend. You can be loved by millions and still leave scars behind. Because at the end of the day, Clint Eastwood didn't come to Hollywood to make friends. He came to make history, and love him or not, he did exactly that.